What is up, guys? We are live here on the Blue Bloods with our Week 8 college football mailbag. And so we have a few questions we got to go over, a few topics that people on Twitter, on our YouTube channel, on our community page submitted beforehand. So we have a bunch of stuff to talk about tonight. And it all starts out in the Big Ten with Michigan State. Our guys over at Off the Ball Network, Say It Out Loud Sports. Make sure to go find them on social media and everything like that. They wanted to know, is Michigan State in the Big Ten a realistic college football playoff contender, or are they just haven't played anyone and they're just kind of sitting up in the top 10 till their schedule really toughens up over these next few weeks? So looking at it right now, in case you guys haven't paid attention to Michigan State football at all, they are 7-0 right now and are leading the East Division in the Big Ten. And they actually find themselves at number 9 in the AP poll as we enter week 8 this week. Have a much needed bye week, but then their schedule gets extremely tough moving forward. And for Michigan State, they face 4 teams currently in the top 25 in their last 5 games of the season. They have one of the most brutal stretches of games to end the season in the country. When you look at what they have number 6 Michigan, a road trip to number 25 Purdue, who just knocked off Iowa. They have a Maryland home game, a road trip to number 5 Ohio State, and also they end off their season with a home game against right now number 7 Penn State. So they have one of the most brutal schedules down the line that you can probably even imagine right now in the country. And when you look at how they've gotten here, they've really leaned on the rushing attack with Kenneth Walker, who we'll address in just a minute, but also they've really relied on the play action pass with Peyton Thorne, who a lot of people really weren't sure if he was going to be the starting quarterback this year or not. Him and Anthony Rousseau went deep into the spring fighting for that job. Peyton Thorne comes out. He had some turnover problems last year, but now with this play action running attack that they're running with Mel Tucker, they have thrown for over 1,700 yards this season, 15 touchdowns, and only had 4 turnovers. So the formula is simple. They run the football and run the play action and let Peyton Thorne push the ball down the field. And on the defensive side of the ball, they're the perfect example of bend but don't break defense. They're allowing up over 400 yards per game, but their scoring defense ranks inside the top 20, only allowing about 18 points per game. It's a dangerous strategy. We've seen many teams try it. Some have failed, some have succeeded, but you're going to know you can put up yards on Michigan State, but that defense gets real tough in the red zone, and they've done a great job of keeping teams out of the end zone in I guess during their schedule thus far. But when you look at the ceiling, guys, and so I guess this is where I'm going to get into whether I think they're a legit contender. I just can't see them winning out. I'm going to be honest with you. When you look at the gauntlet of 4 teams in the top 25 over the last 5 games, and then you have Maryland, who has one of the best offensive attacks in the country with Talia Tagovailoa at quarterback, I just have a hard time seeing them get through unscathed. I mean, to go 5-0 over the last 5 games of the season would be absolutely impressive. And as our guy Crazy Criminal said, if they can beat the gauntlet, yes, they earn their spot, and especially if they win out. But the question is, can they? And right now, I don't think they can, guys. I think this is going to be such a brutal stretch. But right now, I would say the ceiling is probably 11-1. If you can beat Maryland and win 3 of those 4 ranked games you got, because I think you should be able to beat Purdue. So it's really, can you win 2 of the 3 against Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State? The 11-1 ceiling is real for me. Now, the floor for me, I really think is 8-4 and 9-3. I can't see them losing all the way out, but they do have some tough matchups. So I would say right now the floor is 9-3 for me. I think they can do that. I think that's realistic. But if I had to put a bet on it right now, I absolutely can see 10-2. I don't believe Penn State's very healthy right now, and I don't trust that offense right now in big situations. So I think Michigan State can beat Penn State. The 2 losses that I would see is Michigan and Ohio State right now. Ohio State has been playing so much better over these past few weeks, and that offense is clicking with CJ Stroud, and that defense is slowly but surely figuring out how to stop the run. And then for Michigan, that defense for me, I think, is too good in the front seven. They can slow down Kenneth Walker. And what Michigan's doing on the ground right now, averaging almost 300 yards per game, I think they match up very well with this Michigan State defense. So right now, I think they're 10-2, but they're absolutely a legit contender. I don't think this is a bad team. What I think has happened is the back end of their schedule has just become absolutely brutal for them. And so they're going to have to answer, if they can get through the back end of their schedule, it's going to be a legit college football playoff team. I just don't see how they can get through it unscathed. Um, yeah, Coach Simmons, we will talk about that at the end of the show because there are a lot of changes coming to the AAC. If Michigan State can get to 11-1, can they get to the playoffs? I don't think so, Coach Simmons. So let me say this: if they're 11-1, I guess it depends on how it plays out because if they're 11-1, they would have to arguably lose to one of the teams in like the cross division. They cannot lose a division game and make it. And the bad part is they're in the division with Michigan, Ohio State. And so you would have to hope just absolute chaos happens. If they're 11-1 and not a Big Ten champ, I see them, especially Georgia potentially being undefeated. You still have Alabama sitting there with one loss. You still have potentially an undefeated Cincinnati team to deal with. And Oklahoma right now, I don't think they have a realistic, I guess, competition in the Big 12 outside of Oklahoma State, which I don't know right now if Oklahoma State's ready to beat Oklahoma as we're sitting here on October 19th. So for me, I would have a tough time seeing a one-loss Michigan State team getting in. The only way that would happen is if they could find a way to win the Big Ten title, which with all the conference games left, I just don't see that happening personally. But if they win the championship, they absolutely would have a shot to get in. Jeremy Barr says, don't take Michigan State for granted. Yeah, I mean, this team's legit. I really think the run game is that elite right now for Michigan State. So that answers that question, guys. The other question I got asked, this was on YouTube, this was on our YouTube community page. It was they want to talk about North Carolina A&T. This is a team who just recently left the MEAC to go to the Big South. Right now, they had a very tough ranked game against Kennesaw State this weekend, in which they were shut out 14-0. And so the way I spun the question is, what's really the ceiling and or floor? We're going to kind of talk about that Kennesaw State matchup that they had this past weekend. But the Aggies right now are sitting at 3-3, 2-1 in the Big South, and they're tied for third in that conference right now, right, really right behind Monmouth and also Kennesaw State in that conference. So those are the two teams they're behind. Both of them are undefeated, but they already have conference wins over Robert Morris and North Alabama right now. But looking at their schedule ahead, I mean, this is going to be a tough matchup for North Carolina A&T to win this conference, especially with Monmouth being 3-0 in conference already, being the defending champions, and really not having a clear weakness when it comes to conference play right now. And on top of that, they already have a loss to Kennesaw State, who's undefeated in the conference as well. So they would need Kennesaw State to get upset at some point in some conference game. And Kennesaw State is ranked 12th in the FCS right now. And this is a legit college, FCS playoff team right now with that option attack, with that stout defense. Kennesaw State's a legit FCS title contender right now. And right now, North Carolina A&T enters their bye week before hosting Monmouth for their homecoming, which is really going to determine what the ceiling is for A&T. But looking back this past weekend, guys, North Carolina A&T fell to Kennesaw State 14-0, like I said. And right now, you look at what happened. I mean, I don't think so. Everyone's going to clown them, and they have been, for getting shut out. But Kennesaw State's defense, guys, ranks 11th in the entire country in total defense in the FCS, while they're also a top 15 scoring defense in the FCS. Like, this wasn't just North Carolina got shut out by some bums. What happened? How Kennesaw State wins games is they run the option attack. The clock keeps churning. They are second in the country in time of possession. They make the game short, and what they're going to do is just score their few touchdowns and hold you to nothing. And that's exactly what they did. They wore down A&T's defense down the stretch. And also, you look at the defense. The Aggies really struggled this weekend, guys, moving the ball on the ground. And it all starts with All-American running back Jermaine Martin. If Jermaine Martin for A&T is not clicking on all cylinders, this offense takes a huge step back in their productivity. I mean, you look at the Furman loss, he got held to like 40 yards rushing total in that game, and they lost that opening game to Furman. And then this weekend, this Aggies team as a whole, guys, only rushed for 31 total yards and less than a yard and a half per carry. I don't care who you have in the backfield. I don't care who you have at quarterback, anything like that. If you can't run the ball for more than 31 yards, it's going to be extremely tough to win a game of this magnitude against such a talented team like Kennesaw State. Jermaine Martin had 11 carries, guys, for 21 rushing yards. That shows you how stout that Kennesaw State front seven played this weekend. And the two FCS losses, like I said, that the Aggies have, they've been held under 100 rushing yards. So that's a key number. You have to run the ball for 100 yards if you're North Carolina A&T week in and week out. And with the talent that Jermaine Martin has, there's no reason that you can't run for 100 yards a game against almost anyone that you have on your schedule. And this is the worst rushing performance. I went and did some research. A&T has not been held to a worse rush performance since 2006 against Norfolk State. So this was their worst game in over 10 years, man. And so looking at it, the passing game really suffered. I don't know how much North Carolina A&T everyone in the video in the room right now has watched, but the passing attack is at its best with the rushing game going because they run a lot of play action passes off of the run game. And when Kennesaw State was given no reason to respect the run, it put Jalen Fowler at quarterback into very uncomfortable situations all along. He 14 for 35 for 176 yards. The accuracy was just not there for Fowler this weekend. And when you can't run the ball and when you're not accurate with the football, it's a recipe for disaster, especially against a good defense like Kennesaw State has. And I want to take it out to the wide receivers because it's not all on Fowler. Jamison Warren was really the only player on this A&T offense that had a big day on the outside, the only wide receiver to catch more than 2 passes. And Ron Hunt and Corey Banks are the leading receivers on this team. They have to be bigger factors when you have the number 12 team in the country come into town. You cannot just – Corey Banks had 1 catch this weekend, guys, and he's by far their biggest threat at wide receiver, in my opinion. Him and Ron Hunt are right there, but I really like Corey Banks as a wide receiver for A&T moving forward, but he just did not have a great game. And if they can't create separation and make plays down the field for Fowler, this offense becomes very one-dimensional. And, moving forward, I mean, listen, so the ceiling and or floor, I mean, their toughest test is Monmouth. Let's be honest. I mean, Kennesaw State was their toughest test of the season. Monmouth is easily their biggest test of the rest of the season. Given that the Big South freshman of the year and Tony Muskett, All-American running back Jawan Fari at running back is coming in. And when I look at North Carolina A&T, they're better than Charleston Southern. They're better than South Carolina State right now, and they're definitely better than Gardner-Webb, who I don't think is a realistic threat. They should be able to beat all 3 of those teams, and I'm sure everyone in here would agree with me that 3-1 should be that should be the outcome at least. And you possibly could go 4-0 if you can find a way to beat Monmouth in 2 weeks. So for me, I think 3-1 is a great is the goal for the next 2 weeks. They'd be 6-4 for their first season in the Big South. Now, I will be honest with y'all, that probably won't be enough for a playoff spot. They're not even ranked right now. North Carolina A&T is, and this conference only has 1 ranked team in Kennesaw State. So for me, I don't see any way they can make the playoffs. I mean, if they beat Monmouth and go 7-3, they could possibly sneak in with an at-large bid, maybe, but they're going to need a lot of help, especially given that right now all the projections kind of have 3 Big Sky teams taking over those at-large spots. Because right now, the Missouri Valley, the Big Sky, and the CAA are having easily the best years in FCS right now. So I think a lot of those at-large bids are going to go to teams in those conference. So for me, I personally think that 6-4 is probably where the Aggies are going to be. If they get to 7-3, they have a conversation. They'll have an argument for the playoffs. I just don't know if their strength of schedule is going to live up to what some of the Big Sky teams have, especially when they have so many teams ranked right now. So right now, I think that would be the ceiling and/or floor for the Aggies, and that's kind of what happened this weekend. And I told y'all on last week's mailbag that I just thought Kennesaw State was too good on the defensive side of the ball for A&T to really pull out this game. Let me catch back up on y'all's comments. Leon has A&T finishing third in the Big South. That's where I think they'll end up. They'll be behind Kennesaw and Monmouth, and then that game will really probably determine who comes out the champion of the Big South. T said Kennesaw State's defense be hitting. Leon said A&T's defense did good holding the 14 points. I agree. The A&T defense was not the problem. It was the lack of efficiency in the passing game, and then Jermaine Martin being just absolutely held up all game long, and they just couldn't establish any rhythm on offense. Crazy Criminal said, I believe third or fourth in the Big South would be their ceiling. Not bad for the first year in the conference. I agree. T said North Carolina A&T played a good game. The offensive play calling hasn't been good. Coach Simmons says A&T is disappointing him. T said North Carolina A&T has to make plays count also. I agree. The offensive coaching has shown its limitation. I definitely agree with that. Leon said Eastern Washington's quarterback's the best in the nation, period. I agree. Leon, listen, I try to tell Scotty and CFL and HBCU Spotlight, we're all in the same group chat. I texted them after last Saturday when Eric Berrier threw for 600 yards and 7 touchdowns in like 3 quarters of action on just 35 attempts. I mean, he is complete. He's on. Listen, North Dakota State's quarterback Patterson's doing a great job. There's some good quarterbacks around the FCS. Eric Berrier is heads and shoulders above anybody in the country right now at the FCS level, and I've been vocal to say this. I think you have an argument that he's arguably a top 10, top 5 quarterback in the country right now, especially with some of the inconsistencies that we've seen from the top quarterbacks at the FBS level. Eric Berrier, they should just give him the Walter Payton Award right now, because there's nobody in the country that even has an argument to be above Eric Berrier as the best quarterback at the FCS level. I mean, he's generated more total offense than like 85% of teams have at this point of the season. I mean, he's thrown for over 3,000 yards, almost 4,000 yards, and we're only going into week 8. That is an elite level right there. And they've played some really good teams as well. So you can't just say that it's Eric Berrier playing nobody. I mean, they're in the Big Sky. And Leon and T and Crazy Criminal, I don't know. Listen, I understand there's a way to do it. With the way they've been winning, I don't think there's an argument to say that Eastern Washington shouldn't be number 1 in the country right now with their wins. I think Eastern Washington right this second, as we're talking, is the best FCS team in the country. And Eric Berrier is the head of that. Even though their defense isn't spectacular, Eric Berrier is going to outplay just about any quarterback that he sees on the field any given weekend. So I think you got to give Eric Berrier his props. Leon said, I watched this guy this season, Russell Wilson 2.0. T said, I only got to watch a half of the Eastern Washington game. Crazy Criminal said, FCS Heisman winner for sure. T said, a rocket arm for Berrier, and the wide receivers are sick. And Leon said he's including the Power 5 too. He should be a Heisman candidate. That's what I'm saying. Listen, and I know some of the SWAC supporters on the show probably can get mad. He's having a better season than Steve McNair did. And if Steve McNair got Heisman hype, Eric Berrier deserves just as much or more Heisman hype than Steve McNair did back in the early 2000s. Because Eric Berrier is setting records right now for Eastern Washington. And guys, I really think the defining moment for Eastern Washington and Eric Berrier this year is what he does in the playoffs. Because Eastern Washington can win all these games in the regular season. They have to make a deep playoff run, I think. If you can get Eric Berrier into the semifinals and or like the championship game and him put on a type of performance like this, that's where he's going to make his money at the next level. And I'm expecting him right now, with the way he's playing, he's got to be the top FCS prospect on any Senior Bowl watch list, any NFL Combine watch list, anything like that. I mean, he's got to be the top prospect from the FCS to be invited to anything regarding pro prospects coming out this season because he's that good. And right now, especially with Rattler being benched, especially with Sam Howell being inconsistent. And then you look at the quarterbacks around the league. Outside of Corral, none of the top quarterbacks other than him and Ritter are even draft eligible. So you're looking at Eric Berrier potentially being a top 5 quarterback in this NFL draft, in this upcoming draft class. So this is going to be huge for Berrier. He needs to win a title this year, guys. I'm just going to keep it blunt with y'all. I had him on the show. We talked a little bit off camera. He wants a title. Like that is the number one thing on Eric Berrier's mind. So all the stats are great, but I think Eric Berrier has bigger things on his mind. And he's going to try to win a title. Leon said he's going to be a steal. The measurements are going to be a negative. So I'm thinking late second, early third round. I agree, Leon. I think he's going to, even though it's kind of cheesy because they come from the same school, he's going to be right around where Jimmy Garoppolo was drafted, right around in that second round range. I think they're not going to jump and take him super early in the first. He's going to be that second round prospect that everyone's like, okay, he could be a boom type candidate where if you get a starting quarterback out of a second round pick, you got to be feeling happy as an NFL franchise. T said Eastern Washington beat UNLV and Montana. The whole offense has a chance to go pro. I agree. T, the biggest difference between this year's Eastern Washington team and last year's, really for me, has been the offensive line. They've protected him so much better this year, especially against elite defenses. I mean, that Montana defense was the number 1 defense at FCS when they went into that matchup. And it was flexed to ESPN2. It was flexed in prime time, and he delivered a great performance. The offensive line has played outstanding for him, and I agree. Some of those wide receivers are absolute studs. T said Eric Berrier's height is a problem, though, with the NFL draft. He is, but T, the other thing, we've seen so many prospects overcome that. You look at Drew Brees, Russell Wilson. They even said Baker Mayfield was too small at times to play in the NFL. I think you're seeing a movement. The biggest thing for NFL quarterbacks now is can you make plays outside the pocket and be mobile? And I don't think anyone in the chat room right now will disagree with me when I said Eric Berrier checks every box of arm strength and also plays outside the pocket. He's made some plays outside the pocket that are damn near impossible to even understand how he made them. And you can go look at his highlights. He can make a living outside the pocket, making weird arm angle throws, and he can just make something out of nothing. I think for me, that's a bigger thing nowadays in the NFL than just pure, do you check off the height, weight, and this box? Like all they want to see if you're a gamer in the NFL now, because you look at all the best quarterbacks in the league, they can all move. And so Eric Berrier is that type of guy. T said facts, offensive line. Leon said he's 6'1". That's Breeze, Jackson, Mahomes, Vic, Wilson for the Jets. T said he's barely 6 foot. I hate that his height might have to be a knock. Listen, T, they can talk about the height all they want, but right now you got to say he's got to be a second or third round pick. I mean, any lower and it's an absolute just. I don't even know what a FCS quarterback could do to get drafted earlier, because if I'm gonna be honest with you, if you're telling me Carson Wentz and the kid who just got drafted, Trey Lance out of North Dakota State, gets a first round grade after playing like 7 games in his whole career, and you're telling me Eric Berrier doesn't deserve that type of height, then I don't know what to tell you personally, because that would make no sense to me. I mean, he's done more than Trey Lance has in his entire football life. So Eric Berrier, for me, deserves all the respect in the world, regardless of his height. Cedric came in here and said, hey, Blue Bloods, can Jackson State compete right now with Kennesaw State and North Carolina A&T? Also, what do you think about the job Eddie George is doing? So Cedric, right now, I think Jackson State could compete pretty well with North Carolina A&T. I mean, I'm not saying that I don't think they're going to get blown out is what I'm saying. I think it would be a closer game than anything that they've really had in the SWAC. I think it'd be a way tougher test, especially Kennesaw State. Cedric, I mean, Kennesaw State's a legit FCS playoff team. I would pick Kennesaw State over Jackson State just because of the uniqueness of their offense. That option offense is just it's hard to prepare for. That's why you see a Mercer or an Air Force or a Navy or an Army upset so many teams or be in a game with so many teams that are more athletic than them on paper is because the option offense isn't really about necessarily athleticism, but it's more about execution. And so I think it would test. I would love to see Kennesaw and Jackson State play just to see the defensive matchup of Jackson State against that offense at Kennesaw State, especially with the run game that they would bring in. But I think the defense of Kennesaw State would give Jackson State more problems than what they've probably faced this season. But right now, I think they could compete. I just don't know if they would win those games, Cedric. And I think everyone probably would agree with me on that. Is that it would be arguably the toughest test Jackson State's seen all season to meet Kennesaw State. I absolutely do think, though, that Jackson State could easily compete with North Carolina A&T, especially against that front seven of North Carolina A&T. I just don't think North Carolina A&T has the line of scrimmage that Jackson State has, and that's where they would run into a huge problem. T said any lower than a top 3 round for Eric Berrier is disrespectful. Jackson State's not ready for Kennesaw State. Leon said Trey Lance has incredible measurables and speed, Power 5 recruit, but they didn't let him play QB. That's true. Trey Lance only had interest from Power 5. Coach Simmons said, "Want the speed of JSU be a problem in the dome versus South Dakota State?" Coach Simmons, maybe, but okay. So South Dakota State, I think South Dakota State, North Dakota State, James Madison, and Eastern Washington are probably the teams that I don't think Jackson State would have the speed advantage over any of those teams, Coach Simmons. I'm going to be completely honest with you. Right now, I think those teams can match up with Jackson State in terms of just about anything you want to throw out at me. I think those type of teams have the exact same type of recruits and transfers that Jackson State has on the team. Yes, Jackson State had the number 1 FCS class, but some of those players aren't even necessarily contributing right this second because a lot of those freshmen like Quadarius Davis, Evans, they're not really starters. But I really do think South Dakota State, North Dakota State, Eastern Washington, James Madison right now, there's no way Jackson State would give them any sort of speed issues, size issues, or strength issues. I think, yes, would Jackson State get absolutely blown out? Probably not. But I don't think Jackson State would give them any problems more than what they've already seen. I mean, when the top, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, Leon put it perfectly. The top 5 in the FCS, and really, let's extend it, probably the top 10 right now, maybe top 8. They got the same type of Power 5 guys that Jackson State has at every position. And they have just as much talent. I mean, right now, as crazy as it may sound, Coach Simmons, if Eastern Washington and Jackson State matched up, I would give the advantage to Eastern Washington's wide receivers over the secondary at Jackson State all day. I think the speed and the athleticism that Eastern Washington has at the wide receiver spot, and especially the quarterback spot with Berrier, they would give Jackson State absolute fits with that offense that they have coming in. I really do. So I don't think the speed would be the problem for South Dakota State if Jackson State came up to the Dome. And I really don't think it would be a blowout either way. And I mean, also, you got to take into account that Chris Oladuncan, the starting quarterback for South Dakota State, is damn near a 6-year senior, and he's not going to be surprised about anything Jackson State brings to the table. And he is arguably one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the FCS right now. T said, Coach Simmons, JSU could beat ULM, South Dakota State. Yeah, they beat, I believe they beat Colorado State by 20, if I'm not mistaken, T. Let's see. Coach Simmons says ULM beat Liberty and Troy as the number 2 defense in the Sun Belt. T said top 10 FCS has Power 5 talent and coaching. I saw Eastern Washington play. I'm not sold on their line. I mean, maybe Coach Simmons, but they haven't seen, I guess they really haven't seen a D-line like a Jackson State, but at the same time, they've played really well compared to what they were. I mean, I think if you went back and watched Eastern Washington from a year or 2 ago, that it was atrocious. And that staff up there has done a great job of building the trenches because I think they understood what type of talent they had in Berrier at the quarterback spot, and they understood they couldn't put him in danger. I mean, they were putting him in some bad situations. If you go back to like his sophomore film, the offensive line for Eastern Washington was atrocious. Leon said, I think once JSU gets their pipeline going with recruits and transfers, I believe they'll be just as good as the FCS teams. I agree, Leon. Listen, and that's what I try to tell people. I mean, the problem I have with some of the people who come in here trying to jump the gun is that it takes more than one class to be a top FCS team and definitely a top FBS team. Like some of the fans think they can just jump to the Big 12 and compete, which is just a horrible statement there. The biggest thing is you have to compare to North Dakota State has had years of great recruiting class, great recruiting class, great recruiting class, great transfer class. They have a longevity that Jackson State just doesn't have. And as great as Deion Sanders did in his first class, you're not just going to overcome 7 years of consistent recruiting and development that some of these top FCS teams have. Now, do I think after class 3 or 4, Jackson State absolutely would have the talent to win an FCS title? Absolutely. And you can't convince me otherwise because Jackson State is going to be a powerhouse if he can replicate the recruiting success that we saw this past season. But my biggest problem is it takes more. It's not an overnight solution. And that's what I keep hearing a lot of people just assume it's an overnight solution. They're like, one class is not going, like one recruiting class in the FBS would not just automatically make a team go ahead and go beat Alabama. That's the type of comparison you're making on this FCS level. North Dakota State's dynasty is like in Alabama. I mean, they've won like 7 national titles in like the past like 8 or 9 years. So you're not just going to supplant them with one great recruiting class. You are going to have 2, 3, 4 recruiting classes to catch up to what they've already built. They have and you can use a baseball term. They have a farm system of real talent at North Dakota State up there in Fargo that it's going to take some time for any SWAC team to catch up. But right now, when you're looking at what Jackson State's doing, I honestly think FAMU would be the next up. But then after that, I really don't know who would be up next. I mean, you could possibly say Alcorn, maybe Southern, but really and truly, it's going to be a FAMU Jackson State race to see who can get to the FCS playoffs first. Now, this year, I really don't think either one's going to get in this year. I think it will be an off-season conversation at the SWAC to try to opt back into the playoffs because, as Coach Simmons said, they keep mentioning it a lot in these SWAC press conferences, so maybe they're trying to get an auto bid back. We'll see there, but right now, it's going to take more than just an overnight recruiting class to supplement what Jackson State needs to compete at the top FCS level. Now, do I think Jackson State could win a first-round game? Absolutely. I'm with you. They absolutely could win a first-round game. But would Jackson State go in there and push around or be more athletic than any of the top teams who they would face in the second round moving forward? No. And I don't think there's a team right now that I would favor Jackson State over in the top 10. And those are the type of teams that you're going to see in the next round there. T said these schools have a farm system, coaches that develop even from walk-ons. Coach Simmons says any given Saturday. That's a fact. 3 years of solid recruiting would be crazy for the SWAC. That's a thing, Coach Simmons. And this is what I'm also worried about is what are these other SWAC schools doing to compete with Jackson State on the recruiting trail? Because what are they going to do? Are they putting money into resources that are going to make them competitive? Because what's going to end up happening what's going to happen if things don't change for some of these other schools? So yes, Jackson State is building a new facility. They're doing this, that. FAMU's putting a new stadium from what I hear. So as these programs keep expanding and keep recruiting at a high level, what's going to happen to the rest of the SWAC? Because it's going to get to the point where it's going to be Jackson State and FAMU beating everyone in the SWAC by 30 if it keeps going the way it is. So for me, we got to figure out how are these other SWAC schools going to compete with a Jackson State and a FAMU right now as they keep growing, because FAMU is really the only school right this second that has really jumped on this bandwagon and grown with Jackson State rather than falling down and letting Jackson State outgrow them. And it could be because they're in Florida. It could be that Coach Willie Simmons is arguably the best coach in the SWAC. But these other schools are going to have to figure out a way to catch up, or it could get very out of hand for the rest of the SWAC. Coach Simmons says, no, I just want JSU versus New Hampshire. What's your thing with New Hampshire, Coach? I want to know why New Hampshire, particularly JSU coaching I'm assuming he meant better. Coach Simmons, these teams are tops year in and year out. JSU first year competing against top FCS teams is delusional. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. They have to keep going and going. And also, with all the playoff talk coming, I also wanted to clarify some stuff, even for people who are not tuned in, who are just rewatching this on the replay. Um, the FCS playoff bracket, there's been a lot of misinformation spread about this, especially within SWAC circles. So I wanted to kind of, clarify some points that I've heard other people make that are just not true. So the FCS playoff bracket is regionalized now, guys. So the first round, the very first matchups. This is so you got the automatic qualifiers who all get a bye week, and then you have the first round as all these teams start playing each other to move along in the playoffs. That first round is regionalized to save as much on travel costs. So it has to be they try to make it a bus trip 400 miles or less in the first round. So they match you up in the first round by who is closer to who. So the idea that Jackson State would get in or FAMU would get in and have to go play in Fargo or have to go play in Washington is wrong. They would play someone in their region. So let's say in the first round, FAMU would have to go play a Kennesaw State. They would have to go play a Jacksonville State, someone like that who is in their region. So that's one myth that we're going to go ahead and debunk right now, that they would just throw a SWAC team into like the Northeast. The FCS playoff bracket now is regionalized to limit travel costs for any and all teams in there. Also, the committee avoids conference matchups in the first round. So this idea, I heard a few people say we shouldn't play in the playoffs because they're just going to match the SWAC teams up so we can't make it far. They avoid any conference matchups in the first round. So if the two teams played each other in the regular season, they would not be matched up in the playoffs first round. And also non-conference opponents who played each other in the regular season may be matched up, but the main thing is you cannot play a conference opponent early in the tournament. They want to avoid that. That's why you can see a South Dakota State get into the title without having to play, their conference opponent in the first two rounds. Also, once the first round teams are paired up by proximity, they'll be slotted to the seeds that are as close as possible to regionally. So that means all the teams who got the bye week, the 1 through like 8 seeds or 1 through 10 seeds, however it is, though you're put into your bracket with the team that fits in your region. So let's say the bye week went to James Madison. That would probably be the area that the SWAC teams were put in, because they don't want you having to go play at Eastern Washington round 2. You would be in a Monmouth, you would be in a Kennesaw State, a Jacksonville State. That region would be the region the SWAC teams are put in. So this idea that, again, the SWAC teams would get screwed with location is false. They do it as close to possible regionally, not only first round games, but moving forward, putting you in certain brackets to limit travel. Also, so there's this idea that you have to bid for a bye week or that you have to bid for seeding. That's not true. Moving into the second round of the playoffs, all the games are hosted by the higher seed, so you don't have to bid anything. The only bidding is done in the first round. So let's say in your region, so Jacksonville State gets paired up with Jackson State because it's the closest geographic fit for the first round of the playoffs. Those two teams bid against each other to see who hosts the game. This isn't a bid against the entire FCS. This is just you versus your opponent who wants to host the game. So this idea that you have to bid against 24 other teams to even get a first round bye or anything like that is false. You only bid against your first round opponent. Other games are just hosted by the higher seed. So this idea that the SWAC would get screwed because they have to bid for their way into the playoffs is also not true. So I just wanted to give those few clarifying points just for people who may be confused as this SWAC to playoff talk picks up right now. Let me catch up on y'all's comments real quick. Let's see. Leon said, to be honest, college is not much coach-player development. It's up to the player to step up. These coaches are coaching for their job. It's a bunch of development, according to T, especially with training. Coach Simmons said, I have a house there, and I would love for my neighbors to stop talking about the Wildcats. Fair enough, Coach Simmons. T said, FAM has legit players, but the coaching is terrible. Also, yes, the FCS pays for all travel expenses. Exactly. So this idea that you're going to be out of pocket is false again as well. Leon said, yeah, you hit the weight room and train. You get a playbook to study the plays. Ain't no coaches teaching you. They call you on the field. You know your assignment. That's how it works. T said Monmouth and Kennesaw both went to the playoffs in the same year. Yes, they did, but they didn't play each other in the first round. Leon said the pace in college is light speeds ahead of above high school. If you're not fundamentally sound before you get to college, you're going to get smoked. I agree with that. The coaches still teach techniques. Yeah, the coaches teach enough, but it's also what Leon's point is a lot more individual based as well in terms of teaching yourself the playbook and things like that. You have to come so in high school, the coach gives you 100% of what you have to do. In college, it's more like a 50-50. You have to do your 50% off the field, and then the coaches are going to do their 50% in terms of the game plan, but they can't teach you the game plan unless you understand the offense or defense that you're playing in. So it's more of like you're working together rather than you have like a coach per se or something like that. But the last topic before I take y'all's questions live to end the show, we got asked on Twitter by multiple people about the Heisman race. So I'm gonna give y'all my top 5 candidates real quick, and we can discuss them in the chat real quick, and then I'll take your questions probably for about 30 minutes or so live right here on this mailbag. But let's start out with this. I have Matt Corral, the first player on my Heisman list, Ole Miss quarterback. He's thrown for over 1,700 yards, 14 passing touchdowns, 8 rushing, and only 1 pick. Has almost 500 yards rushing for the season, and he's top 10 in passing efficiency in the country, along with top 3 in total offense generated right now. Ole Miss is 12th in the country, 5-1, 2-1 of the SEC. His best game was in a 52-51 win over Arkansas in Week 6. The worst game came in his game against Alabama, which I think is going to hurt him a bit because when you have a game like that on the national stage, you got to perform. He only had 213 total yards, only 2 touchdowns, only 3 yards rushing. You got to play big in those big games, and that was a game where he could have had his Heisman moment. But right now, I think Matt Corral has to be on any Heisman list that you have moving forward. Also, I mentioned we're going to talk about this guy earlier, Kenneth Walker II from Michigan State. Now, this is generally a quarterback award, but if there's a running back that belongs on this list, is Kenneth Walker with almost 1,000 yards rushing already, over 6.5 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns, and a receiving touchdown. He's 3rd in rushing touchdowns this year and leads the country in rushing yards and rushing yards per game. And on top of that, we know it's a team award as well, too. He's been the key factor in Michigan State being 7-0, top 10 in the country. If Michigan State wins out bet on his back, he's going to have a great shot at the Heisman, even at the running back spot, which would be the first one since Derrick Henry to win the Heisman at the running back spot. But you look at his best game against Northwestern Week 1, over 260 on the ground. He averaged over 11 yards per carry and 4 touchdowns in that Week 1 win. But then that Week 4 matchup against against Nebraska Week 4 really hurt him. Only 61 yards rushing, 3 yards a carry, and no touchdowns. If he's got a chance to really put his name on the map, if he has big performances against Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, that's where Kenneth Walker is going to make his money in this Heisman race. Also, the other running back on my list, everyone knows who it is. Bijan Robinson for Texas. And I've read an article, and I agree every bit with it from 247. If the Heisman was given to the best player in college football right now, you would have a strong argument for Bijan Robinson just as an overall player down in Texas. He's got over 900 yards rushing, over 200 receiving, which is something that Kenneth Walker doesn't have. He's got 10 rushing touchdowns, 3 receiving touchdowns, and he's top 5 in rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, and total yards from scrimmage. The one problem for Bijan Robinson, though, guys, is that Texas is only 4-3, and they got a tough schedule ahead, so he might not have the team aspect to really bring him along in this Heisman race, which is why I have him below Kenneth Walker II. His best game was against TCU in Week 5, over 216 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns against one of the toughest defenses in the Big 12. But then you also have that worst game against Arkansas Week 2, where they held him to 69 yards rushing, less than 3.5 yards per carry, and only a touchdown. So Bijan Robinson's being hurt by his team's performance right now, but overall, you got to give him his credit for what he's done this season. Then my final 2 guys, I got Bryce Young, Alabama quarterback. He's the odds-on favorite right now, according to any site you look at. He's thrown for over 2,000 yards, guys, 24 passing touchdowns and only 3 picks. He's top 10 in completion percentage. He's top 10 in passing yards, top 5 in efficiency, and also top 3 in passing touchdowns. And also, as we know, Alabama is always right in the forefront of college football, so he's going to be in the spotlight all season long. And then his best game, of course, was against Miami week 1, where he had 344 through the air, 4 touchdowns, while completing over 70% of his passes. And on the worst game, that A&M loss, guys, yes, he threw for 360 yards, but the lack of completion percentage under 60%, the big pick, which really cost Bama the game, really outweighs all the good he did that game. So that A&M game is going to be his one blemish, but his blemish is not as bad as others just because he was the focal point of that offense in that A&M game and was really the only reason that game was a 3-point game going into the fourth quarter. He turned it around in the second half and really helped Bama come back. So that was easily his worst game, but it's not as bad as some of the other ones. And then the final one, if y'all watch my game preview today, y'all know who it is. It's got to be Kenny Pickett right now for Pittsburgh. And I know some people in the chat can be like, Kenny Pickett, what are you even talking about? Listen, he's completing 70% of his passes for almost 2,000 yards, 21 passing touchdowns with only 1 turnover, and has the 3 rushing touchdowns to go along with it. He's top 10 in completion percentage, top 3 in yards per pass attempt, 4th in passing touchdowns, 3rd in passer efficiency, and he has Pitt quietly sitting at 5-1, leading their division in the ACC, ranked, and he has a big stage this weekend over Clemson, where if he can beat Clemson and put on a show, it's really going to bring him to the forefront of this Heisman race. You look at his best game, 400 yards and 4 touchdowns against Georgia Tech week 5, while his worst game was against Virginia Tech week 7 last week, where he completed, it was his first game under 60% completion percentage, only 200 yards, but he still put up 3 touchdowns. If I had to pick a favorite right now, I would say Pickett and Young deserve the most hype right now just based on-field performance. But my dark horse right now that I don't have in the top 5, but it's going to be very close, is Desmond Ridder right now at Cincinnati. If he can lead Cincinnati to the playoffs as a group of 5 team, he's going to have that argument of, I carried my team to somewhere that they have never been. And look at all the stats that I put up, and I was the leader of this team. And so I think he'll get a lot more Heisman hype as we approach playoff time if Cincinnati finds themselves undefeated week 12, 13, 14, right around there, right before the Heisman talk starts. He had his Heisman moment at Notre Dame, leading that team to the win, being the player of that game. So right now, Ridder will be my dark horse, but that's my 5 right now. Crazy Criminal put in the chat, he would have Matt Corral, Pickett, Stroud, Walker, Robinson, and Young on his list. That's not a bad list. I think you kind of hit all the top guys there. Let's see. Leon said the pace in college is light speed ahead. Oh yeah. Coaches teach techniques. T said what happened to the Akil draft talk. I said he was a free agent, maybe 7th round. Yeah, it's kind of taking a back seat T right now until A&M starts getting something moving. You got to wonder, what is his draft stock right now, because it has definitely fallen this year, especially with the turnover bug that he's apparently caught late, over the past few games against FAMU, against, they didn't have any against Jackson State, but Grambling, that 3 interception performance really hurt him. So Leon asked, Caleb Williams can sneak in there if I think that. Leon, that is a good question. Listen, he'll have his Heisman moment was, of course, coming in against Texas and leading the comeback. 300 total yards, 3 touchdowns in that game. And so for me, I think Caleb Williams could sneak in there potentially, but he's going to have a long road ahead. What he's going to have to do, Leon, is Oklahoma is going to have to go on one of the most impressive runs in college football. He's going to have to put up 300-400 yards, maybe even have a 500-yard game to really separate himself from some of these guys that have already established themselves in the conversation. But right now, you have to think Caleb Williams has an outside chance just because of what Lincoln Riley's offense is and some of the big games they have coming up. That Bedlam game might be huge for his Heisman moment, because right now Oklahoma State sitting undefeated. If they beat Iowa State this weekend, they're going to be in the top 10. If there's a top 10 Bedlam matchup in Oklahoma State on the road, and Caleb Williams has the type of performance that we know he can, that is going to go a long, long way in determining whether he can sneak into this Heisman race. So we will definitely see, but you definitely got to keep him on the radar. Yeah, Leon. I think he's talking about Kenneth Walker. He was high fiving his teammates and shaking their hand on the way to scoring a touchdown this past week. It's one of the viral videos of the weekend. T said, what does what have to do with coaching? Any player supposed to know what the plays and their assignments are? Colleges and Pop Warner top schools develop players for the next level. Um, let's see. Leon said that's why I say light speaks when the season starts. The best players are going to play. If you're a tailback with bad vision, the coach will either pull you or put a running back in with better vision or recruit one. I definitely agree with that. Leon said Glass has to have good workouts with the scouts. Allen, the Bills QB, didn't have a winning record his senior year, and his stats weren't great. Yeah, Leon, Akil Glass. When you're looking at him, you have to say, what is that Senior Bowl week going to be like? If we know the top quarterbacks who go aren't going to get a lot of game playing time because they don't want to risk injury. If Akil can be a starter and prove that he needs to be a starter on one of the North or South squads when he goes down to Mobile for the Senior Bowl, that's going to be key for his draft stock. We saw Joe Flacco do that. We've seen so many guys improve their draft stock at the Senior Bowl against the best talent in the country. If he can go out there and perform against those Power Five guys in a on national TV in front of all the scouts with the NFL coaching staff, that's where Akil Glass is going to make his money. But yeah, Josh Allen didn't have a great senior year. Also, I believe Jordan Love didn't have a great senior year either. He had a very bad year at Utah State, but he performed very well at the combine, the Senior Bowl, things like that. Glass is going to have to, if he can get invited to the Senior Bowl, that's going to be key. I would love to see the Senior Bowl invite Akil and Eric Barrier down to the Senior Bowl this year. I think getting these FCS guys some looks is so important, and especially guys from conferences that don't have a lot of players drafted. You know, I think personally that's going to be the key for him. And also, if he can get to the combine and show he has a bit of mobility, I know that Tom Brady, everyone's going to say Tom Brady didn't run that fast, Aaron, so on and so forth. He's just got to show he can be mobile in the pocket for me. He's got to show he can escape pressure because in that Jackson State game, I know the offensive line played atrocious. I'm not taking that away from them. There were a few plays where he held onto the ball too long and couldn't get away from anybody. So that's going to be, I think, something the scouts look out for as well. And also, he's got to stop the turnovers this year because they're going to ask him, like, what happened? You got in this slump. You did this, did that. He's got to stop and just refocus. If he can lead A&M undefeated for the rest of the year and have a big performance against Alabama State and have a big performance moving forward because they don't have a very tough schedule, that's going to be where it lies. But his biggest thing is I think the scouts are going to turn on that Jackson State film and be like, what happened here? Turn on that Grambling film. What happened here? How, this week he threw for under 200 yards against FAMU. Now that's a great defense, but when you want to be an NFL quarterback, you've got to put it up. You've got to put it up in the big games, and he didn't. So I think Akil Glass, the postseason games are going to be the most important thing for his draft stock. T said Akil hasn't played very well against pressure. Every QB looks good against no pressure. Courtney Sutherland says Josh Allen is bigger and is mobile. Glass doesn't have the arm talent Allen has. Yeah, listen, Courtney, we're not going to try to compare anyone's arm strength to Josh Allen. Josh Allen is a freak right now in the NFL, even though he lost last night. The turf monster got him, but I think Josh Allen is, and also Josh Allen's way bigger than Akil. I don't know how much more he weighs, but I mean, I know they're similar in height, but I just think Josh Allen's arm strength is freaky. I mean, like you said, he's got the strongest arm in the NFL, so I don't think it's fair to say Akil should have that arm strength at all. Crazy Criminal asked, Blue, what are your thoughts on the Nick Rolovich situation and 4 assistants being let go by Wazoo, Washington State for the COVID situation? So, man, so this is tough. Okay, so I'm going to give what I know, and then we'll go from there. So Washington State didn't want to fire Nick Rolovich, based on what I can tell. So what happened here, guys, was Washington State, the state of Washington, made it made it a requirement to be a state and or federal employee in the state of Washington, you had to be vaccinated. So that means if you work for the state of Washington, which Washington State is a state university, you have to be vaccinated. That means every teacher, every janitor, every field manager, everybody who works for any public institution in Washington has to be vaccinated. And so, since Rolovich and four assistants chose not to, by law, Washington State had to fire them. So this wasn't a decision about on the field performance. This wasn't a decision about Rolovich and Washington State having a falling out about not being vaccinated. What happened was is the state of Washington made Washington State fire their head coach and four assistants who wouldn't get vaccinated. And I'm not going to sit up here and yell at anyone about any personal decisions or anything like that. This is a football show. We're not doing that here. But he had his decision. He made it. Now, would I personally give up a Power 5 job just not to get a vaccine? Probably not. But he made his decision. He seemed okay with it in the interview that he had. So if he's cool with the decision, then that's more prerogative to him. But Washington State's hands were tied. And based on everything I've read, I even texted the Washington State insider we had on the show. He said Washington State did not want to get rid of Rolovich. They really liked what he was doing. So for me, it was just the hand was forced, and Rolovich and the assistants, according to all reports, knew it was going to happen and still chose not to do it. If they're cool with that decision, then that's fine. That's fine by me. But I don't know if you want to give up a Power 5 job for that type of statement. I mean, he was making a lot of money, and in the Power 5, jobs don't come easily. So I don't know what his future holds or where he's going to go. But it was really a tough situation. It's a complicated one for Washington State up there. So I was actually going to do some research and try to drop an episode kind of highlighting, Washington State's job and who the candidates might be. But it's not like, they're in a tough spot because firing a coach in the same cycle where USC and LSU have openings is going to be very tough because you're getting the third best option at best. And that's not even, I guess, that's not even including who LSU hires because it's honestly it's going to be tough to see LSU hiring anyone not from a great program. So you might fall back to 4th, 5th, 6th in the line of the top coaches you can hire. So it's a bad situation all around. Let's see. Sutherland said he's playing in Buffalo. It gets very cold and windy. T said LSU made a mistake by firing their coach. So T, okay, so there's been more reports since I dropped my episode on it. Apparently, there's more to the story than what was told originally. So, T, what was happening is he was bringing random people around the program in terms of, like, I guess, women he was involved with. He was bringing them to practice and interrupting practice on multiple occasions to let their kids slide into the drill instead of game prepping. That was one of the big things. And then apparently he tried to make a move on one of the upper administrators or something like that's wife at some function. So what I think happened is the off the field situation caught up with them on top of not performing well on the field. So LSU for me, based on everything I've talked to, I've talked to LSU people who are in Baton Rouge right now with the boots on the ground talking to people. He made a lot of off the field decisions that were questionable, and LSU's hands were tied and had to move. It had to move off of him. I mean, it was almost like they had to fire him. T. So yes, maybe it was a mistake, but when you're talking about LSU, you're talking about probably a top 5 or 6 job in college football. They can get almost anyone they want outside of maybe Dabo Swinney and Nick Saban. Because there's real interest. Listen, I'll update y'all a little bit. There's real interest between Jimbo Fisher and LSU right now. They have been in talks, been in contact, and Jimbo Fisher, that is a realistic option to be the next head coach down there at LSU. And it's going to be a tough situation. So Billy Napier has expressed interest in the job, according to all reports. Jimbo Fisher has expressed, some, I guess, interest, and also the other coach to watch out for. And I didn't mention him on my episode. Mel Tucker at Michigan State has emerged as arguably LSU's their top candidate right now behind Jimbo Fisher. Mel Tucker coached under Nick Saban. He coached at Georgia under Kirby Smart. He has strong SEC ties, and they saw what he did at Michigan State, taking that program from the dumpster fire that D'Antonio had it at when he got let go after all the scandals that hit that program. And they see what he's doing, having them undefeated in only year two after a COVID season really put them behind the eight ball. So look for Jimbo Fisher, Mel Tucker, and Billy Napier as really the top three guys right this second on October 19th that have been mentioned for this job. And also, with all the scandals that's going on, they're going to try to hire the most high character guy they can. So they've had back-to-back coaches now that had major character issues off the field in Coach O and the fiasco that was Les Miles. And we all know what happened at Kansas and emerged behind LSU. But after having two coaches accused of not taking sexual assault seriously, and also with the whole Ed Orgeron bringing random women to practice and letting their kids be at practice and everything, they're not going to hire anybody who doesn't have a flawless background. So that's why the three guys that they've hired have kind of emerged. And also, you look at all the SEC connections. Napier under Saban. Mel Tucker has a long history of assistant coaching in the SEC. And on top of that, Jimbo Fisher is right now coaching in the SEC and also has ties to Baton Rouge. So that's the biggest thing. T said coaches are hard to come by in the SEC. Leon has said California has the same vaccine mandate. EA said there was a lot of off the field issues with Orgeron. Courtney Sutherland said Chip Kelly to LSU. I haven't heard that name, but that could be a name they're keeping in their back pocket. The way that Scott Woodward, the AD at LSU, put it, there is going to be he said there's no name they're leaving off the table other than Nick Saban. There's even rumors that they've reached out to Dabo Swinney. As crazy as that sounds on my show, there are reports that they've reached out to Nick Saban to see if he would even slightly be interested. Dabo Swinney to see if he'll slightly be interested in the job. Crazy Criminal said there's only 65 Power 5 jobs. That is huge to walk away from. EA said he really pissed off the administration. Leon said the SEC coaches, some freaks, they have a history, maybe too much. Especially the Michigan State coach from T. EA said Mel Tucker and James Franklin are the main two candidates now. Yeah, EA. So one of my LSU guys texted me today and said that James Franklin didn't impress them according to all the sources. That could be a smokescreen, but apparently they seem like James Franklin kind of moved down on their list as of today. But as we saw with the Auburn coaching change, as we've seen with every Power 5 coaching change, especially high level like this LSU one, things change by the minute. I could click off this live stream and someone else would be mentioned in the search. But from what I hear, Mel Tucker and Jimbo are number 1 and 2 because Franklin didn't really impress the boosters in that search committee yet. So we'll see about that one. Yeah, Lane Kiffin's in the mix as well. Like I told you on my episode, I just have a tough time thinking that Lane Kiffin or Jimbo's going to leave an SEC job to go to LSU, especially Lane Kiffin after only 1 year, and also having Matt Corral is the recruiting success that he's had at Ole Miss. I just don't see it happening, and it could, but I think personally, if I'm LSU, I'm hiring Mel Tucker or Billy Napier for that head coaching opening. I think Napier and what he's done at Lafayette should not be understated just because it's at the group of 5 level. He's a culture builder. He knows how to develop talent. He's having recruiting success at Louisiana Lafayette, guys. What could he do with the resources at LSU? And on top of that, you look at what Mel Tucker's done at Michigan State already. And also the SEC ties are very strong. He has recruiting connections into Georgia, which, as you guys know, is the main pipeline state for the SEC, Georgia and Florida. And he has connections to those. So for me, I really am liking Mel Tucker as well for this LSU coaching job. But like I said, I'll keep y'all updated as soon as I hear something, and we'll go from there. T said James not leaving, probably he's building a legacy. Leon said Chip Kelly doesn't seem like a Southern guy. Also, Leon, I don't know if Chip Kelly wants the pressure of the SEC. He's at UCLA and he can be 8-4, 9-3, and I don't think they really care. They don't have no one show up for the games really. The Pac-12 is not as cutthroat as the SEC. Does Chip Kelly really want to come down here, start over, because he's finally being successful at UCLA after multiple 3-win seasons? He's finally got things in the right direction. Does he want to come down to the SEC West and compete with Alabama every single year? I can't see him wanting to do that, but we will definitely see. James Franklin was thinking about leaving Penn State. T said Ole Miss is doing good. Coach shouldn't leave. Yeah, Ole Miss is doing pretty good this year, guys. Um, but yeah, so I'll keep you all updated on the LSU job. I'm gonna look into the Washington State job. I know there's a few candidates that has emerged, a lot of Mountain West candidates based on what I can tell. Also, Coach Simmons mentioned earlier, we'll address this and then we'll probably wrap it up. Um, Coach Simmons mentioned the AAC is looking into a handful of Sun Belt teams to potentially expand the AAC after I believe UCF and Cincinnati and Houston are all leaving. I'm pulling a list of teams here. They're looking to expand. We're looking to expand the conference, and so for me, this brings an interesting opening to say the least. When if the CUSA is drained, where do they pull to replace that? And so that's where I think this FCS connection could come into play. Could could the CUSA pull some of the top Southern teams up to the CUSA? You look at a James Madison or someone like that. Could they be the next, FCS team to make the jump to FBS because of the opening in the CUSA? I mean, that it could be possible. And there's also talks of potentially, a North Dakota State or someone, the Mountain West, reaching out to them. So that would be an interesting move as well. So for me, I have a tough time imagining that the AAC gets all the teams, but we will definitely have to see there. But yeah, UAB's one, as Courtney said. So UAB is probably the biggest one because UAB has been balling. If in case you guys haven't been watching UAB football, I mean, they beat Jacksonville State after Jacksonville State, upset Florida State. I mean, they handled them like a whole problem. And so the CUSA is probably going to pull from the FCS. I'm going to try to get a list of teams for you guys that could potentially, you know, be in the running. Crazy Criminal said, I hope LSU does not turn into a Nebraska-Tennessee situation. Those programs have not been the same for decades. Listen, I would have a tough time thinking LSU would ever turn into a Nebraska situation. And it's only because that they don't struggle from the same type of things that Nebraska does. So Nebraska can't recruit their home state because there's no talent within Nebraska. Let's just be completely honest. So they have to try to establish pipelines outside. When you look at Louisiana, it's stacked with talent. I mean, they have all the talent in the world there. So for me, I personally think that LSU is going to be in good hands. They have good candidates, and I don't see many people turning down the LSU job outside of a handful of guys like a Nick Saban, a Dabo Sweeney. Let's see. Crazy Criminal said Coastal, App State, Liberty, UAB, Louisiana, JMU is who I would go after. Okay, so I'm going to ask you guys something real quick. Are we 100% sure the CUSA is better than the Sun Belt right now? Because, I mean, based on the Sun Belt's results, I would have to say that right now I would take the Sun Belt over the CUSA. So I don't know if teams like a Coastal, an App State would actually leave. Now, if I'm the AAC, which is what this comment might be addressing, the AAC for me should definitely go after Coastal, App State, Liberty, UAB, and Louisiana Lafayette. That would be an upgrade for the AAC. But we will definitely see. So yeah, right now, Florida Atlantic, Charlotte, North Texas, UTSA, who's undefeated, Rice, and UAB have formally requested to join. So those are the 6 teams right now who have joined. But if I'm the AAC, I'm looking at Coastal Carolina and App State as crown jewels. I think Coastal Carolina and App State are right there. They probably will have Power 5 conferences calling for them over the next few years. So I absolutely agree. If you're the AAC, I don't know why you haven't called Coastal Carolina and Appalachian State yet, or even Louisiana Lafayette, because those schools have been performing at an extremely, extremely high level. T said JMU is not going FBS. CAA is their conference. EA said LSU is winning with morons as head coaches. They'll probably be okay. I agree. Listen, LSU is the type of job they're going to be fine regardless of who they have in there, really. Especially if I tell y'all right now that they're going to get Franklin, Tucker or Napier, I think we can all agree that's going to be an upgrade over what they had with Orgeron as a guy who didn't even interview his offensive or defensive coordinator hires. So yeah, I think that's what we're talking about there. Crazy Criminals say yes, Blue. All those will be my AAC candidates. Okay, that makes more sense. I'm about to say yeah. Coastal, App State, Liberty, UAB, Lafayette, and JMU. Man, JMU, that's a tough jump to the AAC, especially having to face some of these top AAC teams. But right now, I think you can make an argument outside of Cincinnati, Coastal Carolina would be the second best team in the AAC right this second. And I don't even know if there's a close second potentially. I mean, maybe SMU, who's doing a great thing with Tanner Mordecai, quarterback, the Oklahoma transfer, who's putting up just ridiculous numbers. I believe he leads the country in passing yards right now down at SMU, running that pass heavy offense. So I agree with some great candidates. But guys, man, I appreciate y'all tuning in. Like I said, we're gonna have these mailbags every Tuesday night at 6:30. Definitely appreciate y'all tuning in. I know we got a bunch of live streams going on right now. All scripts streaming right now. I know a bunch of other channels have some things going on tonight. So I appreciate y'all picking us, tuning in right here on the Blue Bloods. But next week, we'll be back here 6:30 p.m. Central Time live on our YouTube channel. Listen, go to our community page. I'll be putting up a post where y'all can comment questions for the show, and we'll feature them on the thumbnail, things like that. And I'll be prepared to talk about them next Tuesday night at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. But guys, for right now, I hope you'll have a great Tuesday night. We are out.